Catheter thrombosis with fondaparinux is due to A. High anti-factor 10A activity, B. Low anti-factor 2A activity, C. High factor 8A activity, D. Low factor 10A activity. Correct answer B. Low anti-factor 2A activity. Though fondaparinux is safe and effective in the management of ST elevation myocardial infarction, it was associated with a higher incidence of guide catheter thrombosis in those who underwent percutaneous coronary intervention. The same concern applies to non-ST elevation acute coronary syndromes, where fondaparinux is ideal in terms of lower bleeding risk, albeit with a potential risk of guide catheter thrombosis in case they need percutaneous coronary intervention. This is because of low anti-factor 2A activity. Fondaparinux has relatively pure anti-factor 10A activity. Unfractionated heparin has the best anti-factor 2A activity. Hence, it is possible to reduce the chance of guide catheter thrombosis in those treated with fondaparinux by supplementing unfractionated heparin. Epicardial ablation of VT will not be useful for A. Fascicular VT, B. Bundle branch reentrant VT, C. VT originating from the papillary muscle, D. All of the above. Correct answer D. All of the above. Most ventricular tachycardias can be approached for ablation endocardially, but there are a few which needs an epicardial approach. VTs originating from the left ventricular outflow tract is likely to be epicardial and perivascular compared to the right ventricular outflow tract VTs. VTs in non-ischemic dilated cardiomyopathy and those in Chagastic cardiomyopathy are likely to have epicardial origin. Among the ischemic VTs, those in the infralateral region can have an epicardial origin. Sometimes VTs in arrhythmogenic right ventricular dysplasia can also be epicardial. When a previous attempt at endocardial ablation has failed, it is all the more reason to look for an epicardial focus. Difficulty with epicardial mapping and ablation is due to the higher learning curve and propensity for significant complications. Success rate for epicardial approach is around 85%. A previous failed endocardial ablation also makes it more likely that epicardial approach will be successful. Other reasons for trying an epicardial approach are difficulty in accessing the left ventricular cavity as in the presence of a thrombus or a prosthetic valve. But epicardial ablation of VT will not be useful for VTs which involve the subendocardium and Purkinje system as in fascicular VT, bundle branch reentrant VT, or VT originating from the papillary muscle. An epicardial VT can be recognized by the slurred initial part of the QRS complex, which resembles a delta wave. This occurs because of the slow transmural activation from the epicardial focus to the endocardial surface. Re-ablation of left-sided accessory pathways is deferred for 2 months because A. Friable tissue at previous ablation increases the risk of perforation. B. Some of the pathways which have been damaged by the initial ablation may lose conduction over the ensuing few weeks. C. Presence of edema in response to tissue damage may distort the local electrogram and prevent the efficient delivery of radiofrequency energy to the desired location. D. All of the above. Correct answer D. All of the above. The success rate of ablation of left-sided accessory pathways is over 95% and the recurrence rate is less than 5%. Most of the recurrences occur within 2 weeks, though it can occur as late as 6 months after the ablation. Re-ablation of left-sided accessory pathways in case of recurrence is usually deferred for 2 months. This is because of multiple reasons mentioned. This chest X-ray PA view is suggestive of A. Tetralogy of Fallot, B. Mitral stenosis, C. Left ventricular aneurysm, D. None of the above. Correct answer C. Left ventricular aneurysm. The bulge along the left border in this chest X-ray PA view is due to a left ventricular aneurysm. There is associated pulmonary congestion due to heart failure, which often accompanies left ventricular aneurysm due to wasted systolic effort of the left ventricle. The aneurysm bulges out in systole, and part of the left ventricular effort is lost in expanding the aneurysm instead of ejecting the blood into the aorta. This aneurysm was secondary to anteroval myocardial infarction. Clinically, there was a dyskinetic seesaw pulsation in the apical region. Echocardiogram confirmed the presence of a true left ventricular aneurysm. A true aneurysm has all three layers of the heart: pericardium, myocardium, and endocardium, while a false aneurysm is a contained rupture bounded only by the pericardium. A true aneurysm can cause heart failure and ventricular arrhythmias, but seldom ruptures, while a false aneurysm has a high chance of secondary rupture. True aneurysm usually has a wide neck, while a false aneurysm has a narrow neck. Diagnosis of the ECG: A. Lateral wall infarction, B. dextrocardia, C. Arm lead inversion, D. None of the above. Correct answer C. Arm lead inversion. Arm lead inversion, right arm lead placed on left arm and vice versa, can be recognized by inverted P waves, negative QRS and T waves in lead 1. The same pattern can be seen in true dextrocardia as well, but in true dextrocardia, the chest electrodes will not show the usual progression of R waves. Instead, the QRS amplitude will progressively decrease from V1 to V6 as the heart is on the opposite side. Simple option is to get a repeat ECG for verification, if possible under direct supervision. Arm lead inversion or technical dextrocardia is one of the commonest errors in ECG recording. This ECG also shows narrow Q waves and prominent T waves in lateral leads with mild concave upward ST segment elevation. The S waves in lead 1 is deep and R waves in V6 are tall, possibly an evidence of left ventricular hypertrophy by voltage criteria. This X-ray is suggestive of A. pneumothorax, B. pneumomediastinum, C. pneumopericardium, D. hydropneumopericardium. Correct answer D. hydropneumopericardium. X-ray chest PA view illustrating air fluid level in the pericardial cavity. In the yesteryears, air used to be deliberately introduced into the pericardial cavity after partial aspiration of pericardial fluid to visualize intrapericardial structures by their contour and to assess the pericardial thickening. Nowadays, with the availability of multiple imaging modalities like echocardiography, CT scanning and MRI scanning, it is seldom necessary. Hydropneumopericardium can occur if an esophageal malignancy invades the pericardial cavity and produces an esophagopericardial fistula. In such case, hydropneumopericardium is rapidly converted into a pyoneumopericardium. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel for future updates and click on the bell icon for all updates. Thank you.